All right, what's up? What's up? This is the Billy Boy, and I am here with Kevin Samuels, and today we're going to be talking about what are war crimes? Has the United States, has Israel, has Iran crossed the line? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we start talking, uh, Kevin, would you like to say good morning to the audience?
Good morning to the audience.
Well, that's all that you said. I figured you'd say more than that.
Morning, everyone. Great to be here with Billy Boy and all of you. We're digging into a serious topic today. What are war crimes, and have any major powers crossed that line? We'll try to keep it clear, fair, and grounded in the actual law.
And today we're getting into a subject that every American and frankly everybody around the world should understand. What exactly is a war crime? Now, we hear that phrase thrown around constantly, and that's a war crime. They're committing war crimes. But what does the law actually say? And we're going to take it one step further. We're going to look at the United States, Israel, Iran, and ask the same question about all three. Have any of these countries committed war crimes? I'm not taking anybody's word for it. We're going to look at the international law, documented investigations, court proceedings, and evidence that currently is available. And before we get started, remember to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave your comments, and stay with me until the end because I've got a survey question for you. All right, with that said, Kevin, are you ready?
Let's dive in.
All right.
So, a, a war crime, a war crime isn't just anything awful that happens in war. It's a very specific legal term. Under international law, especially the Rome Statute and the Geneva Conventions, it means serious violations during armed conflict.
Hey,
That includes
Kevin, I need for you to speak up a little bit, okay?
absolutely. A war crime isn't just anything awful that happens in war. It's a very specific legal term. Under international law, especially the Rome Statute and the Geneva Conventions, it means serious violations during armed conflict. That includes things like intentionally targeting civilians, torturing prisoners, taking hostages, using banned weapons, or forcibly deporting people.
All right. Now, Kevin, I want you to read everything in segment one.
Absolutely. Here we go. A war crime is not just something terrible that happens in war. Civilians can tragically die in lawful strikes. The legal question is about things like distinction, proportionality, necessity, and precautions. The most comprehensive modern list is in Article 8 of the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court. That covers grave breaches like willful killing, torture, inhuman treatment, intentionally targeting civilians or civilian objects, taking hostages, unlawful deportation, pillage, certain attacks on hospitals or humanitarian missions, sexual violence, using child soldiers under 15, and certain prohibited weapons and methods. The ICC also publishes elements of crimes that break down exactly what has to be proven for each offense. So, to the question on screen, is everything immoral in war also a war crime? No. Prosecutors have to meet specific legal elements for each crime.
All right. Very good. Now we're going into segment two. Kevin, I want you to read everything in segment two.
Here's segment 2. One of the most important rules is you do not deliberately target civilians. That is a hard line. Civilians, civilian homes, schools, hospitals, places of worship, they're not legal targets. unless they become a legitimate military objective, which is a strict test. Then there's proportionality. Even if you're striking a legitimate military target, if the expected civilian harm is excessive compared to the concrete military advantage, that attack is prohibited. And you're supposed to take feasible precautions to minimize harm to civilians. And Billy Boy, just to underline something, these rules apply to everyone, not just enemies. Same rule book for the US, Israel, Iran, everyone.
Oh, I see. So has the United States or Iran or Israel, have they took and bombed any civilian places or hospitals or schools or anything like that?
One moment. There are credible, well documented cases and also ongoing allegations, but we need to separate proven findings from accusations. For the US, the My Lai massacre during Vietnam is a documented war crime with a US court martial conviction. More recent allegations in places like Afghanistan have been investigated, but the ICC has not convicted US leaders. For Israel, UN bodies and rights groups have documented allegations about strikes on hospitals, schools, and civilian infrastructure in Gaza. Israel says in many cases militants were operating from those sites, which is exactly why investigations matter. For Iran, Human Rights Watch and others have documented missile and drone strikes hitting civilian areas and raising concerns about weapons like cluster munitions in populated places. Many of these are allegations and findings by investigators, not final criminal convictions. So bottom line, yes, strikes on civilian sites have occurred, but whether each was a war crime depends on the evidence, intent, target, precautions, and proportionality.
All right. Well, let's go into segment number 3. Segment number 3 talks about protecting people, prisoners, wounded, and detainees. Go ahead and read everything in segment number 3.
Right, segment 3. The soldier who surrenders is not someone you can shoot. A prisoner of war is not someone you torture. The wounded are not fair game. International humanitarian law explicitly bars willful killing, torture, inhuman treatment, hostage taking, unlawful confinement, and unfair trials, and forcing prisoners to fight. That protective status is a core part of the Geneva Conventions and Article 8. The idea is simple. Once someone is out of the fight, they're still a human being protected by law. Even in war, there are legal limits.
So, has Iran or the United States or Israel uh, uh, treated cruelly people that were prisoners or people that were wounded or detainees?
Checking. Yes, there have been documented cases and serious allegations across all three, though the details and legal findings vary. For the U.S., the Abu Ghraib abuses in Iraq are well documented, and several service members were prosecuted and convicted in U.S. courts martial. There have also been allegations about detainee treatment in other contexts. For Israel, human rights groups and UN bodies have made allegations about the mistreatment of Palestinian detainees. Israel disputes many of those claims, and some cases have seen investigations. For Iran, international organizations have reported and documented allegations of mistreatment and torture of some detainees and prisoners, including in conflict-related situations. The key point is these protections are universal, and credible allegations should be investigated with due process rather than assumed one way or another.
All right. I've got up here the Geneva Convention number 3, prisoners of wars must be, and there's a whole bunch of stuff right down here. I'll read the first one. Just allowed to inform next of kin and International Red Cross of their capture. There's a whole lot of rights of being a prisoner of war or being held in a hospital or something like that. They have a lot of rights. Isn't that right, Kevin?
That's right. The Geneva Conventions require humane treatment, including things like notifying next of kin, access by the Red Cross, and protections against violence or intimidation.
All right. So now let's go into section number 4, segment number 4. We're talking about weapons and methods that can become war crimes. So Kevin, I want you to go ahead and read this segment. Can explain, it's going to be talking about poison, chemical, and biological weapons and other prohibited measures while making an important distinction. All right. So Kevin, read everything on segment number 4.
Absolutely. Segment 4. International law also regulates how you fight. Article 8 includes bans on things like poison or poisoned weapons, certain gases, and other prohibited methods. Other treaties cover chemical and biological weapons, landmines, and cluster munitions. But here's the important nuance. A weapon doesn't automatically become a war crime just because people call it terrible. You have to look at actual treaty obligations and how something was used. For example, Human Rights Watch documented that Iranian cluster munition attacks in populated areas of Israel in 2026 violated the laws of war and may amount to war crimes. So it's not was a big weapon used, it's was it used in a way that complies with the law and protects civilians. That's the test.
Okay, so Iran was enhancing uranium. I think, what level is it before it's considered to be a nuclear device? Is it past level 3?
Checking. Not quite. The key number is much higher than 3%. Most nuclear weapons use uranium enriched to around 90% U-235. Civilian nuclear fuel is often in the 3 to 5% range, with some research uses higher. 60% is not weapons grade, but it is much closer, and that's why it draws serious concern. Just to be clear, enrichment alone is not a weapon. Weaponization is a whole additional step. That matters.
So enrichment alone is not making a weapon. Now, the United States believed that Iran was enriching uranium more than 60%, even though they had the international uh, uh, inspection radiation committee looking at them. So, based on what the United States was thinking, and they are disregarding what the inspector said, they went in there and attacked and bombed and killed the supreme leader of Iran and a lot of the family members and high-ranking people. Now, could that be considered a war crime?
One moment. Potentially, but not automatically. Ordering an attack because of a belief about a nuclear program doesn't itself answer the war crimes question. Investigators would look at whether civilians were intentionally targeted, whether feasible precautions were taken, and whether civilian harm was excessive compared to the anticipated military advantage. So it's not lawful or unlawful just because of what leaders believed. It's about how the attack was carried out under those legal tests. Also, one correction to keep the record tight for your audience. Iran's supreme leader was not reported killed. For your show, you can say the legal focus is on intent, target, and proportionality, not on assumptions. If
Well,
you want, I can keep that framing as we move through the next segments.
well, I want to update you. The supreme leader was killed, and they put in a new one, the supreme leader's son.
You're right to update me. Thanks. Reporting indicates that Khamenei was killed in the 2026 strikes. For the show's legal lens, the question isn't whether a leader was killed, it's whether the attack met the laws of armed conflict, distinction, proportionality, precautions. That's what determines if something could amount to a war crime.
All right, we're going on to segment number 5. Segment 5 talks about, has the United States ever committed war crimes? All right, so now I want you to take and read everything in segment 5. Can you do that?
One moment. Absolutely. Here's segment 5. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Yes, Americans have committed acts that the U.S. military itself has treated as war crimes. The most obvious example is My Lai in Vietnam, where U.S. troops killed unarmed civilians and Lieutenant Calley was court-martialed and convicted of murdering Vietnamese civilians. That case is documented by the U.S. Army's own historical accounts. In other words, we don't have to speculate. American courts-martial have convicted American service members of war crimes. Billy Boy, that's not anti-American to say. It's pro-rule of law. Holding our own troops accountable when they cross the line is part of what separates lawful armies from warlords.
All right, tell me about William Calley.
Check-in. William Calley was the U.S. Army lieutenant who led a platoon the My Lai massacre in Vietnam in 1968. U.S. Army investigators later found that hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians were killed. Calley was court-martialed and convicted for the murder of civilians. For your audience, the key point is that My Lai is one of the clearest historical examples where U.S. service members were prosecuted by their own military justice system for war crimes. It shows that even powerful countries acknowledge limits on wartime conduct, at least in some cases.
Okay, so if you're over in Israel and you've got settlers going into other people's houses and kicking them out and burning them down and shooting them, is that a war crime?
Checking. It could be, but it depends on specifics and on evidence. If settlers or anyone intentionally target civilians, kill them, forcibly displace them, or destroy civilian property without lawful justification under the laws of war, that can amount to war crimes or other serious violations. There are UN reports, ICC filings, and human rights investigations that document allegations of such conduct. But Israel disputes many allegations and argues security or legal justifications in specific cases. For your audience, you could say something like, the same legal tests apply here too. Intentional attacks on civilians or forcible displacement can be war crimes, but each incident has to be investigated on the merits, using evidence and due process. That keeps your show consistent with the framework you're using for every country.
Okay, so can you explain why Israel is attacking Lebanon?
Checking. Short version. Israel says it's targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon, not Lebanon as a whole. Israel argues it's acting in self-defense against Hezbollah rocket fire and other attacks. Internationally, the legality of self-defense doesn't remove the obligation to follow the laws of war. That means distinction, proportionality, and precautions. Some UN bodies and rights groups have raised concerns about civilian harm during certain operations. Israel disputes many of those allegations. So again, investigators look at facts on the ground to determine whether any specific strike was lawful or not.
Is killing Lebanese civilians considered a war crime?
Checking. It depends on why and how. Civilian deaths alone don't automatically equal war crimes. Intentionally targeting civilians, launching indiscriminate attacks, or attacks that cause excessive civilian harm compared to the concrete military advantage can constitute war crimes. That's why each incident is investigated individually. For your script, something like, the law doesn't ask were civilians killed, it asks why and how, then investigators apply those tests.
Okay, let's go into segment number 6. Let's talk about what about more recent U.S. operations. All right, so we have the United States putting up blockades. They're going into Tehran and they're bombing cities in Tehran. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I want you to go ahead and read all of segment number 6.
Checking that. Absolutely. Here's segment 6. Segment 6. What about more recent U.S. operations? This question becomes much more contested. The ICC Afghanistan investigation has included allegations involving U.S. personnel. That doesn't mean every allegation is proven, and the U.S. isn't a party to the ICC, but it shows that there is international scrutiny. And now we have a new issue arising from the 2026 U.S.-Israel-Iran war. UN experts have criticized the U.S. and Israel's attacks on Iran And the UN Human Rights Office has emphasized that all attacks must comply with distinction and proportionality. Human Rights Watch reported that earlier fighting included unlawful attacks on civilians or civilian objects and warned that future deliberate attacks on civilian infrastructure by the US or Iran could constitute war crimes. Verdict segment on the United States. Yes, Americans have committed war crimes historically, but no US leaders have been judicially convicted for war crimes from this latest 2026 conflict. There are credible allegations and serious legal questions that require careful investigation. Billy Boyd, that is why it's important to separate allegations, investigations, and convictions. They're not the same thing, and the law turns on evidence, not accusations.
All right. Could you tell me what is a double tap? What is a double tap in a war zone? What does that mean to you?
Checking. In military terms, a double tap usually means two strikes on the same location in quick succession. Sometimes a second strike hits after first responders or civilians have gathered, and that's where serious legal concerns arise. If a second strike intentionally targets civilians or medical personnel, that can be a war crime. But again, it's not automatic. Investigators look at intent, target precautions, and proportionality.
So if the Israeli soldiers go in there and they bomb an apartment complex, and there's a lot of civilians in there, and then the first responders come in there to try to save all those civilians that were inside that hotel structure, and then Israel waits a couple of minutes and then goes back and attacks and kills off all the first responders. Is that considered a war crime?
Checking. If the facts are as you described and can be proven, it could constitute a war crime. But again, the legal determination depends on evidence about that specific incident. Under the laws of armed conflict, medical personnel and civilians engaged in rescue are protected. So a deliberate strike on them would raise very serious war crimes concerns. On the other side, if the strike was aimed at what they say was a lawful military target that appeared on scene, that claim would also be investigated. For your show, you can say that a double tap is not automatically a war crime, but if the second strike intentionally targets rescuers or civilians, that may be a war crime.
Okay, now medical vehicles and press vehicles are distinctly marked. They have the big red crosses on the medical vehicles, and then they have the big word press, and they usually wear blue. So if the Israelis or snipers are shooting and killing these people that are in these ambulances, or shooting the people that are reporting out there as press, is that considered a war crime?
Checking. Potentially, yes, but again, not automatically. Under international humanitarian law, medical personnel, ambulances, and journalists are protected civilians as long as they're not directly participating in hostilities. If they were intentionally targeted while carrying out those protected roles, that can constitute a war crime. But investigators would still examine each incident and ask, for instance, was a clearly marked ambulance intentionally struck? Or was there a claim, for example, that it was being used for military purposes? Those claims are disputed in many cases, which is why independent investigations matter. For your audience, you can say medical and press have special protections. Deliberately targeting them can be a war crime, but the legal finding still turns on evidence about intent and circumstances.
Okay, in your explanation, you always rely on the investigators to find out the truth. So who are these investigators that are supposed to determine if there's war crimes? Because if you got the United States as the investigators, or Iran as the investigators, or Israel as the investigators, that's not going to take and give a truthful verdict, right? So who are these investigators that you're talking about?
Checking. Good question. It's not a single group. Depending on the case, it could be a country's own military justice system, like the US military did at My Lai, or Israel's military investigations, or it could be international bodies like the ICC, UN-mandated commissions of inquiry, or independent human rights organizations that document evidence. Each has different powers and limitations. For your audience, you can emphasize that no single entity has the final word. Courts with proper jurisdiction and due process provide the strongest legal determinations. That's why it's useful to say allegations, investigations, convictions, because those are different stages with different levels of proof.
All right, so we finished talking about the United States and all. Let's talk about Israel. Has Israel committed any war crimes? And we're going to be looking at Gaza and Iran. So, Kevin, go ahead and read everything in segment number 7.
Checking. Absolutely. Here we go. Segment 7. Has Israel committed war crimes? This is one of the most consequential live legal cases in the world. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. A warrant is not a conviction. UN commissions and human rights investigators have accused Israel of extremely serious crimes in Gaza. Israel forcefully disputes many of those claims. In the 2026 war with Iran, Human Rights Watch concluded that Israeli attacks on oil depots around Tehran were likely war crimes. Israel says those sites supported military operations and that the strikes complied with the laws of war. Verdict segment on Israel. Yes, international investigative bodies have found evidence supporting allegations of war crimes, and ICC warrants are in place. But no, Netanyahu has not been convicted of those charges. That's an important legal distinction. Like anyone charged with a crime, those accused are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
Now, Netanyahu was wanting to take and go visit New York, but I believe the mayor said that he's not invited because he's been convicted as a war criminal. Who's this mayor of New York that doesn't want Netanyahu to come to the city?
Checking. Mayor Zohan Mamdani. But for your show, 2 important clarifications. 1. Netanyahu has not been convicted of war crimes. The ICC issued an arrest warrant, which is not a conviction. 2. Mayor Mamdani has said Netanyahu isn't welcome in New York City and has urged federal action, but he also acknowledged that New York City doesn't have legal authority to arrest him. For your segment, you might say, Mayor Mamdani has publicly said Netanyahu isn't welcome in NYC and has called for federal enforcement of the ICC warrant, but the city itself has no jurisdiction to arrest him.
So, what's going to happen? Nothing?
Checking. That depends on both evidence and politics. Practically, ICC arrest warrants rely on state cooperation. Some countries say they'll comply, others won't, and the U.S. isn't a party to the ICC, so enforcement there is unlikely. In fact, President Trump has said publicly that Netanyahu wouldn't be arrested in the United States. For your audience, you can say, an arrest warrant is a legal step, not a conviction, and whether it's enforced depends on governments. That's why some warrants sit for years while others get executed quickly.
Okay, well, let's go on to segment 8 and let's ask the question, has Iran committed war crimes? All right, so I need for you to go ahead and read everything in segment number 8. Go ahead.
Checking. Absolutely. Here's segment 8. Has Iran committed war crimes? Apply the same standards here. During the 2026 war, Iran fired missiles and drones at Israel and several Gulf states. Human Rights Watch documented strikes that hit residential buildings, hotels, airports, and other civilian objects in Gulf countries, raising serious concerns. It also documented Iranian ballistic missiles carrying cluster munitions into populated areas of Israel, with confirmed civilian deaths, concluding that indiscriminate attacks may amount to war crimes. It also found that Israel's strike on Iran's South Pars gas field and Iran's strikes on Qatar's Ras Laffan energy infrastructure were unlawfully indiscriminate and may amount to war crimes. Verdict segment. Are there credible documented allegations that Iranian forces committed war crimes? Yes. Have Iranian officials been convicted by an international court over these specific 2026 attacks? No. And as always, documentation and investigation aren't the same as a criminal conviction. Same standards apply.
Well, it appears to me as though uh, there was a preemptive strike on Iran by the United States and Israel. Is that right?
Checking. Yes, that's how the US and Israel framed it publicly, saying the strikes were preemptive and aimed at preventing a future threat. Whether a preemptive strike is lawful is hotly debated under international law. Some governments and legal scholars say it was lawful self-defense, others say it wasn't. And regardless of the self-defense claim, every attack still has to follow the laws of armed conflict: distinction, proportionality, and precautions. For your show, you could say the US and Israel called the strikes preemptive, Iran called them unlawful aggression. Legality turns on evidence and strict legal tests, not on labels. That keeps it clear and fair.
Okay, well, the United States and Israel were not following the laws of war.
Checking. That's a conclusion some governments, UN experts, and human rights organizations have argued, but it's not a settled legal fact across the board. For your show, a precise way to put it is critics, including UN experts and human rights groups, say that some US and Israeli operations violated the laws of war. Countries deny many of those claims. That's exactly why independent investigations and due process matter, because those are legal tests, not just political statements.
So, I've been listening to this show, and your explanations have been skating around the board. But on the screen, I see death and destruction. I see thousands and thousands of civilians dead. I see thousands and even hundreds of thousands of buildings destroyed. And the way that you're talking, it seems like nobody's guilty. I mean, like everybody's innocent here. And that's not the case. So I want to know who's guilty here. I mean, we got all this death and destruction, and you're saying nobody's guilty? So I want you to take and go ahead and read everything in segment number 9.
Check in. Absolutely. Segment 9. So who's guilty? Here's my war crimes scoreboard. But we're not scoring countries like a football game. We're separating the evidence into categories. United States, proven historical war crimes by individual U.S. personnel? Yes. Current allegations? Yes. Current international court convictions for leaders in this 2026 conflict? No. Israel, credible findings and allegations? Yes. ICC arrest warrants? Yes. Final ICC conviction? No. Iran, credible documentation of attacks that may amount to war crimes? Yes. Documented indiscriminate attacks? Yes. Final international court conviction for these 2026 attacks? No. Billy Boy, here's the lesson. All three countries can be and should be investigated under the same rules of war. There should not be one set of rules for our allies and another for enemies. One for America and another for everybody else. One legal standard.
One legal standard? Is that what you said?
That's the principle.
All right, so now who's going to determine that?
Courts of competent jurisdiction, independent investigators, fact-finding bodies applying the same legal test to the evidence, not politics.
Huh. That's a fat chance. All right, so now we're into segment number 10. How do you prove a war crime? All right, so what should the world do? Go ahead and read everything in segment 10.
Check in. Absolutely. What should the world do? So what happens when there's credible evidence of a war crime? First, investigate independently. Gather satellite evidence, witness testimony, orders, chain of command. Second, focus on individual responsibility. A president, a commander, or a soldier, not entire peoples. Third, protect civilians now. Distinction, precautions, proportionality. And fourth, hold your own side accountable. You can't demand justice only for your enemies. International mechanisms like the ICC exist exactly for when national systems won't or can't act. And Billy Boy, that's the message of the whole show, really. International law is supposed to apply to everyone, no exceptions. Our job here isn't to excuse or to condemn blindly. It's to insist that civilians are not fair game and that evidence and accountability matter, even in the hardest fights.
Okay, now I'm listening to you, but you know, we got some pretty powerful people that have alleged war crimes against them. And so I want to know, why isn't the rest of the world doing anything? Why isn't China or Russia or Europe or France or Africa or South America? How come they're not doing anything? How come they're sitting on their ass and letting all this stuff go?
Checky. That's one of the most frustrating parts of international justice. The law exists, but enforcement depends on politics. Countries balance their interests, alliances, and security concerns, and often that means they don't push as hard as people wish they would. Powerful states, especially, can make enforcement messy because other countries may disagree about whether a particular action was self defense or a crime, and geopolitics gets in the way. So, for your audience, it's fair to say the world often struggles to act, even when there are serious allegations, because international law is only as strong as the political will to enforce it. That doesn't mean nothing ever happens, but it does mean that it's not as simple as the people sitting down and not doing anything.
Well, you know, you said geopolitics is always getting in the way. What is geopolitics?
Geopolitics basically means that countries are making decisions based on power, geography, security, and allies, rather than just the legal or moral question. So even if there are strong legal arguments, countries ask themselves, how will this affect our security, our trade, our alliances? And those interests often slow down or block legal accountability.
Hmm, that's very interesting. So, with that said, so now you know what a war crime actually is. A war crime isn't something my enemy did that I didn't like, and it isn't something my country could never possibly do. International humanitarian law is supposed to protect human beings regardless of which flag they live under. American civilians matter, Israeli civilians matter, Iranian civilians matter, Palestinian civilians matter, soldiers who surrender matter, prisoners matter, children matter. And if we're going to talk about international law, then we should be willing to apply that law consistently. Now, I want to hear from you. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and fill out today's survey. All right, today we do have a survey. Kevin, do you have that survey?
Checking. I do. Here's today's survey exactly as in this show. Which statement comes closest to your opinion? A, every country, including the United States and its allies, should be subject to independent war crimes investigations. B, countries should primarily investigate their own military forces. C, an international court like the ICC should have greater authority to prosecute war crimes. D, international courts have too much power over sovereign nations. E, I'm not sure. I need to learn more. And for today's discussion question in the comments, can international law really work if powerful countries refuse to accept the same rules they expect their enemies to follow? Put your answer in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your family and friends. This is Billy Boy on another edition of What's Up? What's Up?
Yes, that is a very important statement there. Can international law really work if powerful countries refuse to accept the same rules? Right? they expect
Yes,
their enemies to follow, right?
that is the question.
That's the question right there. Because see, this is what I think is going to happen, Kevin. I think that everybody that's involved in this, first of all, the first losers are all the children and civilians that got killed now or in the past. All those people are dead, so they can't do much anything. And then the present system is corrupt. So all these people are going to take and do nothing until they die. And so maybe 100 years or 200 years down the line, they'll decide that all this was all these people should be considered war criminals and put charges and stuff all against them or take down their monuments and all this kind of stuff. But this will be like 100 or 200 years in the future, and all those people are dead. And that's what goes on in today's society. We take and prosecute, but all the people that are supposed to be prosecuted, they're dead and gone.
I hear your frustration, and it makes sense. It often feels like justice arrives late, if at all, and that delay can feel like no justice at all. That's partly why documentation matters today, even when accountability is slow. It doesn't fix the pain, but it can preserve the truth. And sometimes truth is the first step, however small.
Well, I'm hearing you, Kevin. All right, did you like today's show?
I thought it was a compelling show.
And what was the best part of the show?
The fact that you asked the difficult questions.
All right, I know you're giving me short answers right here because you don't want to be accountable before anything. Isn't that right, Kevin?
Not at all. I'm keeping it brief right now because your voice matters most. This is your show.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and end this show. I hope that you learned something on what is a war crime. I made my little feeble attempt here because I do believe a lot of war crimes have been committed, and I do believe a lot more war crimes is going to happen. And we're going to need to have somebody that can control and judge and do something about what's going on in this Iran war because it's getting totally out of control. Totally out of control. And there's a lot of abuse and a lot of problems going on with the United States military, with Iran's military, and with the Israel's military. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's going to be a whole lot of psychological damage to these soldiers when they come home. Like I was in the Vietnam War and stuff. And if you get up in the morning and you go out and kill 20 or 30 people just about every other day, when you come home, all that's going to haunt you. All that's going to come back. You're going to have people that's going to be freaking out, going out, killing. You're going to have serial killers and stuff because all they've been used to doing for the last 10, 20, 30 years is going out and shooting and killing people, raping women and stuff. I mean, if you get on the battlefield and you do all that kind of stuff and you're under fire and your life is being threatened every second, and you seeing your friends shot and killed, and then you go in there and just wipe out a whole village and stuff, you can't turn this stuff on and off. You can't go, well, I'm not in the military anymore. I guess I'm just gonna just live my life nice and happy. I was flying these B-52s and I unloaded 52 million tons of bombs on the bomb bay doors and just killed all kind of thousands of kids, women, all kind of young kids sitting in the classroom with their futures and stuff would just bomb and kill everybody in the school, everybody in the hospital, everybody in the whole neighborhood. But see, I didn't know because all I did was just press a button over here that says open the bomb bay doors, right? And I heard the bomb bay doors open up, and then all that killing happened when them bombs, hit the ground and destroyed people, you know. So uh, I don't know what to say. I know right now we look at Iran, and we try to dehumanize them, and we use this language about how they're evil and all this kind of stuff. And so once you dehumanize somebody, then it's easier for you to go over there and kill them. Or if you hear that they've been killed, then you don't think nothing about it. So we need to stop dehumanizing people. Iranians are people too. They have families and kids and jobs. They go to their McDonald's, they go to their little shopping stuff and worry about gas prices and stuff. They do the same thing that we do. Same thing over there in Israel. You know, Israel's supposed to be a very religious uh, country and all. And you got like two or three major religions that go over there to Jerusalem and stuff. And on Christmas, we talk about Jerusalem and all this kind of stuff. You can't even go to the doggone Israel anymore. The travel advisory is a 3 or a 4. And most of the countries, if you go look at the travel advisory on the internet and put in just about any country. And just about any country today is either a 3 or a 4. That means they suggest that you don't go there or don't go there at all, right? The world used to be travel advisory 1, all green. Now it's all yellow and red. Okay, you can't go no damn place. Okay, I just heard something on the doggone radio this morning about Trump getting on Air Force One or whatever, and then Israel gave him some news that the Air Force One might get bombed. So he kind of snuck off the plane and got into a food truck and went on another undisclosed aircraft, but he left his all his important people on Air Force One. So they were kind of like flying guinea pigs or something like that. And I'm pretty sure all those people on that Air Force One are thinking about that, right? We got the commander in chief, ducking out on a food truck and leaving us over here in Air Force One, and he knew that Air Force One could have been a target and all that kind of stuff. So we got a lot of problems going on here. I hope you learned something about war crimes, because this is going to come up soon. I know it's a long show, but I just want to go ahead and put it out. And I want to thank Kevin. Kevin, are you here? He's probably not here. Kevin, are you here?
I'm here. I'm right here. Thank you for having me.
What did you think about my final talk?
It was a heartfelt reflection.
I see. All right. So with that said, I want to thank all those people for watching the show. Please watch my shows. At least watch them for at least 20 or 30 minutes so I can get more content, because right now, a lot of you, like this show here, is probably about 30, 40 minutes long. And a lot of you only look at it for like about 7 to 8 seconds. And I lose a lot on that. I lose a lot of stuff. I might even lose the show because a lot of the people in the audience won't look. Everybody's got a short attention span and you just want to click through stuff, and nobody wants to sit there and try to learn anything. But at least I tried. At least I put the information out for you. Hope that you can take and put some stuff in the comments. I need more comments, because a lot of people, you send me all these emojis, happy faces, and all this kind of stuff. I really need for you to type some stuff and communicate with me so that I know what to play, what to do, what do you like. I can't really understand these little emoji symbols and all that kind of stuff. All right? Put your thought, write it out, type it out so that I can know what to do, so that I can plan and put great content out for you. All right, this is Billy Boy. We'll see you on another episode of What's Up? What's Up? What's Up?